Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pro Wrestling Inside and Out Live. On this program, we're going to talk about the most hated wrestlers in professional wrestling throughout the years. And we're going to be joined by our panel, Mitch Lucas, Rodney West, and Jack Lord. I'm going to start this off right off the bat, and I'm going to say someone that could be also in the most popular, and that is Tojo Yamamoto. If someone never saw him wrestle, when he would sneak up on someone and scratch that back, the crowd reaction was incredible for Tojo Yamamoto. So I'd say Tojo Yamamoto. Does anybody got any stories about Tojo?
Let's not forget about Tojo and the wooden shoe. There would be no matches without the wooden shoe. Just beat him down and he'll grab the shoe. He could either way it goes, he would have that shoe. If he's in the corner attack match, he'd have that shoe and he'd smack him on the side of the head. People would be mad. But yeah, Tojo, or the salt. He threw salt. He was one of the best.
Yeah, there was no, but yeah, people loved him, but as much as they hated him as well. So, we could have put him on the most popular. All right, Mitch, what's one of your most hated wrestlers throughout the years?
Well, you know what? Since you said that, I was thinking that there is kind of a fine line between love and hate. Since you brought up Tojo, I'm going to throw a few at you that a lot of people listen to this podcast, and I know all you guys don't count in this because you're going to remember everything I say. But Bob Armstrong had a run as a heel in '83 in Southeastern. Roddy Piper was both at one point the most hated wrestler in the Carolinas and at one point the most popular wrestler in the Carolinas. Randy Savage, who was, people will tell you was one of Hogan's best runs with the title when they did the jealousy story with Miss Elizabeth. Ted DiBiase in Mid-South had a great run as both heel and face. And the best I say for last, a lot of people don't know this, but before slamming the cage door on Kerry Von Erich, the Freebirds were actually really popular in Texas before that happened. So a lot of good memories there, and a lot of thin line between love and hate stories.
Yeah, especially Randy Savage. I mean, he could do it both ways. Randy was actually crazy, so he could really do well with that. Rodney, who was somebody that you thought was one of the most hated wrestlers?
Mine is, and again, I'm going to blow everybody away. Again, that's just the way I do things. But this one is Abdullah the Butcher. No matter where he went, you can watch. If you ever want to see anything funny, watch him in Japan running the Japanese fans all over the arena. Yeah. And no matter where he went, if he was against Cowboy Bill Watts, Bill Watts still talks to this day about when he walked tall against Abdullah the Butcher in Atlanta, Georgia. I mean, and it didn't matter who Abdullah, especially when he was in Georgia, who he wrestled against. If it was Black Atlas, who later became Tony Atlas, they were filling it up. I mean, and it was just, I think it was Abdullah was the monster. He was the quintessential monster, no matter where he went, whether he was in Puerto Rico, whether he was in Georgia, whether he went to Texas against Bruiser Brody or against the Von Erichs, no matter where he was the monster. He was the quintessential monster. In fact, I was even scared of him. You had those taped fist hands and using those chops, and you never know what pencil. He would grab a pencil off of the announcer's timekeeper table and stick it in their eyes, and he was a monster, whether it was against Bob Armstrong or against wrestling too. And you always, when Abdullah, especially when I was growing up, when Abdullah wrestled, you were nervous. You were nervous because you felt like you're wrestling too, or Thunderbolt Patterson, whatever. They're going to get hurt. They're going to get hurt. And it was kind of a very formulaic match where Abdullah pretty much dominated the first 10, 15 minutes of the match, and then whoever he was working against came back on him. but then it ended up in a brawl in most cases. But Abdullah is number one on my list.
I want to say hello right now to, I guess, is that Frida? Is that Frida Lee? She says she's watching in Dutton. Thank you so much.
And I'm going to tell you, they are really young using the computers. They get younger and younger using the computer.
Also, we'd like to say hello to Daniel Harbin. Hey, guys, we would like to thank you so much for coming on and listening to it on Pro Wrestling Inside and Out. Now we're going to talk to someone. He should know what being most hated is like, because Jack Lord in his time has been very hated in the professional wrestling business, not only, a little bit behind the scenes sometimes, but also in wrestling, and that's Jack Lord. Who is somebody else except for Jack Lord that you know of that got a lot of people hated him?
Well, my personal favorite was my superstar. Bill Eadie, to me, just exemplified what a bad guy heel was supposed to be. Honestly, it was my first time at an actual big time wrestling show was Columbus, Georgia, in 1980. And the first show I went to, the main event, was a Masked Superstar against Mr. Wrestling #2. And I don't know, I had been around the business for a lot of years, even before then, setting up rings, doing stuff. I didn't think I had what it took to be a wrestler, though. But I remember sitting there watching that match and turning to my now ex-wife. I got a couple, and saying that's what I'm going to do. And I told Bill Eadie this one time. I said, she never did like you because of that.
Well, now, Daniel Harbin said you were on the top of his list as the most hated wrestler.
There might be. Did you owe him some money, Jack? You owe him some money?
If I do, just tough luck,
I'm with you, Jack. I'm with you on the superstar, master of the Cobra hold. That was one hold right there, and that was the main thing. I remember when he got to put the Cobra hold in wrestling too, and he called the hemorrhage on television. The Cobra hold, the superstar. I'm right along with you on that. And not only that, but when he did his interview, he spoke with such class. You could believe what he was saying. You knew what he was up to. I remember when he first come to Georgia, and he didn't have to mention who he was talking about, but all he said was, Georgia's not big enough for 2 masked men. Georgia's only big enough for 1 masked wrestler. And everybody knew who he was talking about. And they never touched each other until they met at the Omni for the first time. Georgia Heavyweight Championship match, Superstar versus Wrestling 2. It was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
And don't forget the Superstar tore Wrestling 2's robe up on television. I think it might have been their second time they were wrestling each other.
I believe that was the third.
Was that the third time?
That was the third. They wrestled each other actually 2 times at the old TCG studios. They did it twice. The first time when Ole Anderson and Ivan Koloff was Georgia Tag Team Champions. And then they came back a second year and did it when they did the Phony Wrestling 2. When Superstar brought the Phony Wrestling 2 in. And then did it again years later, Wrestling 2 against Superstar. That was a shackle match at the Omni. And that was when they tore up the road.
All right, wait a minute now. We got to check. Daniel said, no, Jack's all right. One of my favorites growing up. So now he's changing his tune all at once.
Oh, my goodness.
He's changing his tune.
He's turned on us, Brent. He turned on us.
Evidently, he never saw Jack beat up Terry Gordy several times when we were running shows and people hated his guts.
You have to be careful. Them chairs get in those matches easy. Yeah. People throwing them, letting they jack. People throwing those chairs in the ring, and you just so happen to dodge them and hit Terry Gordy with it. It's just, it was amazing.
Stuff happens,
Frida Lee said, my dad never liked Tojo. Evidently, even when he was a good guy, he didn't like it.
Didn't like it because he's sneaky.
He was sneaky.
And if you watch Bobby Eaton, he also did the Tojo Yamamoto sneak up and scratch him in the back as well.
Yes.
He did the same thing.
Somebody I think, Mitch, you might have mentioned was Roddy Piper could go both ways. They loved him, but boy, when they hated Roddy Piper, man. When he came to Atlanta, I mean, people hated him, and he didn't take them much. He didn't take them long for people to really not like Roddy Piper in Atlanta. And I think Charlotte was even worse. And one of the reasons he decided to turn was because he got stabbed in the dressing room because he had so much. People hated him so badly. So he didn't want to be a bad guy after that. And you can't really bad. Or as we call it. You'll notice I don't use too many of the heel baby face because when I was in the wrestling business, I didn't use it a lot because when you were talking to a fan, you didn't want to mess up and go, well, this heel over here, you wanted to make sure. So I didn't use it that often. And today, I have a hard time using it today. The heel baby face, all the jargon of professional wrestling.
And Piper had people eating out of the palm of his hand. Remember, he came to the aid of Gordon Soley. In that famous angle there on the stage in Georgia. And then when he went to New York, and a lot of us that have been around forever, if you forget, I will say that. When I say New York, a lot of times I'm referring to the WWF, now WWE. It was called New York back in the day, and I still call it that, but it's McMahon's group. When he went there, he had to have extra protection everywhere he went. And a lot of people forget. And then, of course, he did in 87, he goes right back against Adrian Adonis, and he becomes probably the second most popular person on the card, only to Hogan for WrestleMania 3. But Piper, he could make you hate him and then turn around and cheer him a week later. A lot of people had that ability. Randy Savage, as you talked about, one of my favorites, had that same ability. And who could forget he had the run as the Macho King, and he retires at WrestleMania 7 after losing to the Ultimate Warrior. And shortly after that, he was hated. And then shortly after that, here comes Jake Roberts with his Cobra and gnaws on Savage's arm in the ring. And you had, pictures of video of kids and women crying in the stands. Another great heel, Jake the Snake Roberts.
Yes. Anton Seville, I believe he says, my most hated was Mr. Wrestling 2 because I asked him for an autograph when I was 7 and he turned me down. Then Ole Anderson signed it later that night. Well, that's incredible. That's usually a switch. Sorry to hear that. I think we spoke about this. I think we went back and forth about Anton, and I thought it may be one of the posture wrestling 2s, but he made sure to let me know that was the wrestling 2. Maybe he just had a bad night, But sorry that you had that experience with wrestling 2, but you had a good experience with Ole Anderson, so you should be very happy.
Surprise.
Yeah. The Ole Anderson signed your autograph, and there's probably not many people that have Ole Anderson autograph. Let's see, Jack. What is another guy that you just knew that they had the fans right in the palm of their hands and they hated them?
Well, as we just mentioned, Ole Anderson, but the whole family, were just heat-seeking missiles. Lars. What was the old brother?
Gene.
Yeah. And of course, I think Gene was the only actual Anderson. And then, of course, you got Arn, that a lot of people want to argue was, should have been world champion at some point in his career. And I'm not going to disagree with that. But I thought Ole to me was a linchpin because he was the heat with any tag team he was with. I was privileged to see not only the Andersons do a few things together, and him and Arn, but also him and Ivan Koloff. Man, what a tag team they were.
Yes.
And my favorite was him and Stan Hansen, where they done the whole angle where Stan was a babyface and got fined, and Ole paid the fine, but in order to pay him back, he had to tag with him. I love that. I knew what was going on, but I was still buying them tickets to go see it too.
I think most people that were wrestling fans in that era, I believe they knew that there was somewhat. They didn't know how the magic was being done, but I think people knew there was some magic there, no doubt. Now I'll tell you, when Ole Anderson cuts Tommy Rich's hair on television, him and Ivan Koloff, now that was some heat, and it drew a lot of money in Atlanta. And them people were hot when, after they did that. Tommy would always have these scissors and try to cut Ole's hair, and the place would go crazy. I mean, Ole Anderson, people hated his guts, and when they turned him back in was it '79? I think they turned him. I don't think he ever got the people behind him like they hated him, though. I don't think he'd ever get on the most popular list of any list for that matter, but especially
that whole angle he did with Dusty, and then where he and Gene, the assassins, I think Ivan Koloff, all in the cage, and they all turned on Dusty. I was there that night. Man, that was unbelievable heat that was going on. I was in the nosebleed sections, and I was worried if I was going to make it out. They were hot. They was stuff being thrown everywhere.
Anton said, "Yes, sir," and Ivan was sitting with him. Thanks, guys. Thank you, Anton. Kevin Tubbs said Buzz Sawyer. Do you agree, Buzz Sawyer?
Yeah.
Great.
Buzz was a good one. No doubt about that.
It in the ring and out of the ring.
That's right.
This is
even at the auditorium when he dropped his M&Ms in the hallway out there and stomped them. He stomped
I was
all over the place, and he's stomping them.
And then he gets on there in Chattanooga. There's a box that they used to call it the Harry Miss Thornton box. She was the only one that got to sit in this box at the Memorial Auditorium, and so we were sitting there, and at this particular time it was Georgia Championship Wrestling, but we still call it the Miss Thornton box. But he came up there and sat on the side of that, and he just all at once one of his feet just left one side, and he went and straddled the side of the thing, and he looks over and goes, "Oh man, I busted him." Climbed down, got to the door, and climbed himself through that door. Came to the other side. I mean, I don't see how he wrestled that night, but he did. He went in and wrestled against Tommy Rich, which we'll talk about that in some videos. We'll talk about the Buzz Sawyer and Tommy Rich feud, how it got started and why it got started. A lot of people, Ole Anderson takes a lot of credit for that, but my father actually is the one that started that in Chattanooga, Tennessee at the Memorial Auditorium when they didn't want to use Buzz Sawyer and Tommy Rich up north. And there's a reason for that, and we'll get into that somewhere down the line. But Buzz Sawyer was very hated in professional wrestling. Rodney, who's somebody else you've looked at that says, "Hey, this guy was hated"?
Well, I mean, we talked about wrestling too, and I forgot the gentleman's name that's been said that he had a terrible experience with him. But Mr. Wrestling 2 was on our list last week, but Mr. Wrestling 2 could be on this list as well. Yes. Because in the Mid-South, after what he did to Magnum TA, there was no coming back from that. I'm just going to tell you right now. In fact, I will say in the Mid-South, he was number one. And I know there's a lot of people that would disagree with that. But later on, you're going to have a discussion with Bill Dundee, I know, about the Mid-South, because he was responsible for a lot of the brain power that put all of that together. And he will talk about the Midnight Express went against Mr. Wrestling 2 and Jay Youngblood, and things didn't end up like the promotion really thought it would. It was quite simple. Me and Brent was actually sitting in the front row at the Irish McNeil Boys Club, and that was the first time I ever saw the people tell the Midnight Express to whip Wrestling 2. And that was because this was after the situation with Magnum TA. Magnum TA had since left. And then I guess out of the blue, Wrestling 2 comes out, teaming with Jay Youngblood. And then they supposedly thought, well, this is going to open up old wounds. Well, it did. The only old wound it opened up was the fans hating 2 for what he did to Magnum TA. And in that night, Jim Cornette was not the most hated man in the Mid-South. In fact, if I was Bill Watts, I wouldn't have let that shown on my TV, because it was very telling. Because it really did. And like I said, Brent will have more about that in weeks to come when he has another interview with Bill Dundee, and they'll explain what happened on that night. And it was something to behold.
We lost Jack, evidently. We've lost him. Maybe he'll come back on. Here he comes back on. Let's
might have been insulted because I said something about Cornette.
There he is. He's back. He came back.
He's on that side. I mean, he's on that side.
I didn't like where I was, so
you wanted to be over on the other side.
Okay, that's all right. That's all right.
When we talk about, Jim Cornette has talked about on his podcast, if you can get past the profanity in the podcast,
it's rough.
It's kind of rough. But he has talked about that he was the most hated person in Mid-South. By far, Wrestling 2 was. I know that Jimmy's probably going to hear this somewhere. Somebody's going to tell him, but Jimmy, I'm sorry, but you are not the most hated person in Mid-South Wrestling, because when your team can turn babyface because they're beating somebody, I'm sorry, but you do not hold the heat. Wrestling 2 had it. They made a mistake by letting him go to Wrestling 2 at the time. They should have kept him. He should have been a manager there. They were getting rid of the Midnight Express soon after anyway, and I think that would have been spectacular. Put Wrestling 2 as a manager, because people hated. People would say, "Beat that old man." I don't know how many times.
Oh man, it was beyond anything I'd ever seen. It really was. In fact, we didn't get to see the build-up. We got there after Wrestling 2 and TA, and we didn't get to see it later. And what 2 put Magnum TA through? That was something. And then, like I said, the only way to put Wrestling 2 back to where he should have been, or what we all think he should have been, was to reconcile with Magnum TA. Magnum TA was gone. It was impossible.
Yeah, Dusty, it came to the Superdome show. And I mean, he just ate up all kinds of talent while he was there. The Rock and Roll Express. I think Jimmy Crockett was actually there. And I mean, they just took everybody. They took the Rock and Roll. They took Magnum TA. I think they took everybody that they wanted, and so it left them. And that's the reason we're going to be talking in April. We'll talk about Brad Armstrong again and how he ended up there and why he ended up in Mid-South Wrestling. Someone else that I think we all would agree on, and that's the Iron Sheik.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, he can stir a crowd up.
Oh, Iron Sheik was something else, and evidently something else outside the ring. The only time we ever had any thing outside the ring is Ole Anderson took his, his turban and threw it up into the lights at the
hat. Studios. He had just a regular, he had one of these old hats that he had, and he threw it up in the lights.
He threw it up in the lights, and for whatever reason, the Iron Sheik didn't want to climb up there and get that. I never understood. He had me or Rodney one got up there and got it for him. But that was about the only time we had anything to do with him outside of wrestling. But the Iron Sheik, anywhere he went, he would generate some heat.
Bring that flag out, and here we go, USA.
It was
we were in, I think it was Cedartown, Georgia. He was all the way up into the top of the stands with that flag, and he ran Burhead Jones all over the place in that building that night. I mean, he could wreak havoc wherever he went.
All right, Brian Bodie Green said the original Sheik.
Yeah, no doubt, absolutely. He was on my list. He took my thunder. Iron Sheik. I mean, the original Sheik. Man, oh man.
Kevin Tubbs said Andre hated the Iron Sheik. I believe the reason he hated him is because the Iron Sheik was a little rough on the enhancement talent, or as back in the day we called the Job Boys. But I think he was rough with them, and Andre didn't like him because of that. Thank you so much, Kevin. Let's see. Oh yeah, I hated the Iron Sheik. Daniel Harvey hated the Iron Sheik. Jay Smith said Butch Reed said he had some heat down there in Mid-South. Yes, he did.
Absolutely. Another backstabber, Butch Reed on the Junkyard Dog, for sure. Yes. For sure. And you know what, though? I think that they thought that Butch Reed, after the Junkyard Dog left, thought that he could really take Junkyard Dog's place. But the truth of the matter is, Junkyard Dog was a once-in-a-lifetime thing. And you just cannot recreate it. No matter what you do, you cannot recreate what had already been established. And no matter how much you try, it just never works. No matter where it's been done, you never can recreate it. And Butch Reed was one of those, never supposed to take JYD's place, but never really did.
No, he really didn't. Let's look at Byron Bodie Green, the story of the Sheik and the Boy Scouts, the TV taping where your dad used to tell was hilarious. I'll have to bring that back up. We've had so many stories going up and down the road. We'll have to share some of them when we rode with Dick Murdoch, when we rode with Jerry Roberts, which later became Jock Rougeau, the Mountie. I think Jack is back now. Let's bring him back in.
I got internet issues.
Well, that's all right. Well, you just come and go, and you missed us talking about you, so you'll be all right.
There's another reason why I'm single, I guess.
Jack, who's another most hated wrestler that you know of?
During the time frame when he was heel for WWF, Sergeant Slaughter, during that whole run, I can't imagine anybody having more heat during that time period than what he did.
Yeah.
I remember the stories about Vince having to hire security to stay at his house 24 hours a day. People really took that turning on America to heart.
Yes,
It's great stuff. Great stuff.
Mitch, what's another person that you just you may have even hated him. I don't know.
I'm going to tell you, I saved my most hated for the middle of the show here. When I was a kid, and I mean a kid, 16, 17 years old, I'm not going to touch on Continental the whole show, but I would be remiss if I did not bring up Kevin Sullivan. When they did the whole thing with the headhunters, the third headhunter coming from through the mat on the Tennessee Stud and Robert Fuller. But my guy, when I was growing up, my favorite wrestler was Brad Armstrong. And it was Kevin Sullivan. Of course, Brad was going on to Jim Crockett. But it was Kevin Sullivan that beat Brad in the old loser leave town match in September of '86. So, in my opinion, he robbed me of getting to see more Brad Armstrong, Jerry Stubbs matches. So I hated Kevin Sullivan. I even I look back and the run that he had in the '90s, in the mid '90s against Hulk Hogan, right before the NWO angle, when they did the Dungeon of Doom and all that. Not a fan of that. To me, it almost, I can tell you, I was not alone on Kevin Sullivan dislike. I bet you 3/4 of people in the state of Florida hated Kevin Sullivan more than I did for all the Dusty Rhodes feud over the years. So Kevin Sullivan would be up on that list for me. And I'll be honest, Rodney's story about the IROC Z and Robert Fuller and Jimmy Golden and the Nightmares, the night they turned on Danny Davis and Ken Wayne and threw Danny in the back of the car. I don't know if you guys were in Boutwell or not, but I was. And I remember that night, and for 3 or 4 weeks there at least, Robert and Jimmy got some serious heat.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
no doubt. No doubt.
While we're talking about Continental, we have to say this name as well, Jerry Stubbs.
Yeah.
He was hated. We were at the Boutwell Auditorium, and I don't know why Jerry, I don't know what he was doing, but he came out on the stage about maybe 15 minutes before the show, and then people booed him out of the building just stepping out there. Jerry was, he was really hated in the Continental and the Southeastern area. Now, he will tell you that sometimes he wasn't hated as Mr. Olympia, but when he first came and became a bad guy, and we'll talk about this on another program, but he was Mr. Olympia, and people hated him. So, Rodney, who's somebody else that you got?
Well, since we're talking about Continental, I want to talk about a person that we saw got jumped on more than by the fans by any other person. I'm talking about Adrian Street and Miss Linda. It just seemed like for a while, every single week, Miss Linda was being jumped on, or Adrian Street was being jumped on. It almost got where it was nightly. Dad was having to go to the ring and stop people, and him and Adrian, Dad would hold them down, and Adrian would kick the crap out of them.
Okay, I get a question on that.
Sure.
And the two West boys can answer this. Jack, you may be able to answer that. As a teenager at that point, there were some of us, and I'm not one of them, but there were some people that thought that was arranged. So I knew it wasn't arranged. But what happened to some of those ladies that tried to cross the barrier to get her? Did they get arrested? Do we know?
No, most of them just went right straight out the back door and was thrown out.
Okay.
And that was the end of it. Most of the time, it wasn't worth, putting a warrant out for them, because nobody was more. The only people that was hurt was them. Most of the time, Adrian and Miss Linda. Now, if we had an incident where one of the wrestlers were injured, yeah, we pressed charges. But most of the time, no. Right out the door and into the parking lot they went, and they weren't allowed to come back in. but they could come back the next week. We very rarely barred anyone because we wanted that money when they come buy them tickets. But yeah, there for a while. I mean, we had a man jump Miss Linda in Montgomery, and
Wow.
Dad sat on him and lifted his head up, and Adrian got out of the ring and he said, kick him, and he would just. And Dad said at a certain point he started feeling sorry for the guy. Because, I mean, Adrian was just measuring him, and, I mean, he was aiming for the goalpost for that man's head. I mean, it was, like I said, it was almost nightly with Adrian Street and Miss Linda.
You know, we've been talking about single wrestlers, but there was some guys that when I was growing up in the 70s that wrestled for Nick Goulas and wrestled in Memphis. But the Bounty Hunters, David and Jerry Novak with Jim Kent. Was it Jim Kent?
Yeah, Jimmy Kent.
These guys, I can remember, man, people hated their guts. And we actually have one of the, I think it's David Novak on our followers. That's his dad. We have I can't remember the guy's name right now, but the Bounty Hunters was something else. Jack, what's another guy that's on your list?
Oh, Lord, let's go way back. Gorgeous George.
Yeah.
He revolutionized our industry back in the late 50s. I was reading up a little bit on him where he was the #1 top draw from 1960 to 62. Everywhere he went, sold out. And he retired in 63, I believe. So, heck, I was 4 years old. So, but I've watched, a lot of his stuff over the years, and still waiting for that movie to come out that I understand WWE's been working on. So.
Yeah, I saw that. Let's see. In San Antonio, Miss Linda saved Adrian when he was attacked by stabbing a fan in the eye with her spiked heels.
Miss Linda will hurt you.
Yeah.
I'll just tell you right now, Miss Linda would hurt you. She would wear those spikes on her hands, and I mean, pow! I mean, she didn't play.
My hater wrestler was Invader #2 for what he did to Bruiser Brody. He stabbed in the locker room. I understand that. That was uncalled for. That was a very sad situation. Thank you, Jerry, for that. I'll tell you somebody else that I think that Ron Fuller. I think Ron Fuller was one of the most hated wrestlers, and especially.
He was also the greatest manager of all time.
Of all time.
Of all time, he was the greatest manager. He was going to be the Triple Crown manager. You're going to have all three, and all of his men's going to have all the belts around here. I am the man in this part of the country.
You know, it's funny because any time that they went on television and they said, next week, the Tennessee stud, Ron Fuller, will be here, it always done well. Because
they knew he was up to something.
They knew something was going to happen.
He was up to something. He was scheming somewhere, somehow.
Now, Mitch, did y'all ever, you grew up watching wrestling. Did you ever put 2 and 2 together and figure out that Ron Fuller was the owner of Continental Wrestling?
I'm going to be honest with you. I did not until when he sold it to David Woods. When they sold the company to David Woods, and it got around my regular stop for Continental. I went to Boutwell a lot, but my regular stop was Columbus, Mississippi, in the old dirt floor Lavender Coliseum that everybody loves so much. And I'm sarcastic on the love there, but because that was a rough place. But yeah, it was. But when it got around that the promotion had sold to I'll use what most everybody was saying that night, to a TV guy. And I know I talked with David a few times, and I think he probably has some regrets of how things worked out. But I did not know that Ron was in such a position until that happened. I will say this, looking back, it might have taken a little bit of my fun away from it. But like most fans, I hated Ron Fuller, especially from about about August, June of '85 until he came in and denied the relationship with Kevin Sullivan, which we all know, he the famous scene where I think you can see on YouTube where Sullivan knows the ruling, where they say they can't throw any more punches at the podium. And Gordon Soley says, remember the ruling. And Ron Fuller says, what ruling? I don't know anything about a ruling. And of course he throws the first punch and he gets suspended. But another Kevin Sullivan story there. You know what? Before we move on, we always talk about a thin line between love and hate. I can tell you that in conversations with your good buddy, Tommy Wildfire Rich, he will tell you that one of the most intense nights of his life was when he and Austin Idol cut Jerry Lawler's hair in 1987.
Oh, yeah.
And if you go back and look at the footage of that, that's pretty obvious. I didn't live that out. I didn't see that until weeks after it happened. And by that time, some of the heat had kind of dissipated. But even though Tommy was about as popular a person as you'll ever see in Georgia Championship Wrestling, and he had his popularity in Memphis too. But boy, that night, it's a wonder Tommy Rich and Austin Idol got out of the Mid-South Coliseum.
Yeah. They, it's like Jim Cornette I hate to keep on going back to him, but he said that Tommy Rich did not draw after he left Atlanta in 1983. But that's not true. Tommy Rich drew while he was in Continental Wrestling in 1985. He came back in 87. He drew in Memphis. So, Tommy Rich's career did well until the 90s. And I think he was in great shape when he came back to World Championship Wrestling in 1990.
He was.
I mean, He was in the best shape he'd ever been. And I think if Ole Anderson and Dad would have stayed as the bookers during that run, Tommy Rich would have had another big run. But Dusty was not going to push Tommy Rich. And I don't think it's because he had anything against him. He just didn't trust him. And I think that might have been Dusty had all his people that he could trust. Jack, who's somebody else you can think of?
Oh, the Assassins.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, Jody Hamilton and whoever he was tagging with at various points. Man, what a great heel tag team they were. Jody was another one of those that I, like Bill Eadie, I would watch and kind of emulate their interview style. Always kind of low-key, didn't yell hardly. And like Bill Eadie told me, be different from everybody else. They're yelling, you talk so a little bit softer. But yeah, man, what a tag team they were.
Brian said Eddie Gilbert in the UWF. That was good stuff with Bill Watts and the Russian Flag. That was some good stuff. So Eddie Gilbert, especially in Memphis, Eddie Gilbert, people hated him in Memphis as well.
Eddie Gilbert and your dad, in the deal where Eddie attacked Willie B. Hurt's son, and your father became involved in it because didn't he end up handcuffed to Paulie Dangerously for a few nights over the Willie B. Hurt, Eddie Gilbert situation, if I remember right?
Yeah, I think he got hit a couple of times with Paul Dangerously's telephone. Yeah. That man must have had 45,000 telephones during his time that he beat people with. Rip Oliver, who recently passed, caused riots with his feud with Billy Jack Haynes. That's the Portland territory. I think Ken Timms wrestled there a lot. But, I never watched Portland wrestling, but I have Rip Oliver, Billy Jack Haynes, Buddy Rose.
Piper, several others. Grappler, I think, was up there too, wasn't he?
The Grappler was. He had a good run up there. Lynn did.
Rodney, what's another person you have on your list?
When we're talking about riots, I think the number one cause of riots all over the world, Ox Baker. And anybody's ever seen it, oh my gosh, that was something with Ernie Ladd. My goodness, but he was causing riots everywhere. How many people did they say that Ox Baker killed in the ring? We're talking about Ray Gunkel. It was he had the long list, and the way that he would do his interviews. It was he would scare you to death just by that with that heart punch, my dreaded heart punch, and those whatever you want to call them, that mustache and beard. Man, he had the look, no doubt. And for me, it was Ox Baker. He was He was a monster. He was another one of those monsters. And like I said, what was it he said about Dusty Rhodes and a heart punch? He hit Dusty with a heart punch and he kicked out. He said it just must be he's got too much fat around that heart or something. But yeah, Ox Baker was one for me.
Yeah, Ox was something else. If we've got that video somewhere on the YouTube channel, so if you can go look it up. It's Ox Baker Causes a Riot in Ohio. By the way, if you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel, we ask you to please subscribe because we got some big stuff coming up the rest of the year, and I think everybody will enjoy it. Jack, there's got to be. We have to say the fabulous Freebirds, Michael Hayes, Terry Gordy, Buddy Roberts. And I guess we could also later on, even though people have a problem with it, a lot of people don't like Jimmy Garvin, but those are some people that can generate some heat.
Yeah, they were great, man. Of course, you know how much I love Terry, and I don't know that I've ever beat the snot out of nobody or been beat up as bad as what I was with Terry, especially when he was tuning up for Japan. But yeah, man. I mean, unbelievable heat. We talked a couple of weeks ago about I was there during their first time in the Omni, when they came in for that tag team tournament. And it was just magic, man. I have never experienced anything like that since then. There's something. Great guys.
Yeah, no matter where they went, when they pile drive Ted DiBiase on the floor at the TBS studios, that was gold. The only problem was at the time there were some booker changes and it just got messed up. But that could have drew some big time money in Atlanta with Ted DiBiase and the Freebirds, and I think Tommy Rich came back at the time, so it could have done really good. But just its internal problems just messed that up. But the fabulous Freebirds have to be there on the top of the list. Mitch, who's another one of the people that you can think of?
I got a couple. We can't go through this whole show, and I know he's another one of these that people love too. We can't go through this show without mentioning Ric Flair from about 1985 to about 1988. And I'm talking about I personally saw people kicked out of Boutwell Auditorium when they would come to when he would be against Sting and Lex Luger and Wyndham on top. And he's right. Brian's right. Ox Baker was great. He was a scary dude. The other one that I want to mention from the other end of the spectrum is Terry Funk did some outstanding work in 1989 and over the course of his career. But that was obviously, with Flair's run as a face. But that whole year of 89, Flair and Steamboat, and then Flair and Funk, the pretty much the rest of the year. You're talking about a great few months of TV. That was just one thing after another. Literally, you kept you on the edge of your seat, and of course Terry Funk and that offbeat promo style. You just never knew. I'm sure that somebody was sitting surely on the censor button, not knowing what he was going to do at any moment. But it made for fun TV. It really did.
Terry Funk did an interview once, and he had Dory. Dory was taping it, and he said he gets out of this truck, and he's doing it. Let me tell you something, you egg sucking dogs, and you hear Dory go, Terry. Don't worry about Terry. I'm telling you about Dusty Rhodes, and all at once the truck runs him over, goes over top of him. And he gets up and he says, "Not even a truck can keep me down, Dusty Rhodes." Great. I don't know if the interview ever aired, but we got to see it. It was hilarious. But yeah, he was good. Jay Smith said Gino Hernandez.
The handsome half breed.
Yeah.
Gino Hernandez. Let's not forget about them and. What was it? Chris Adams against the Von Erichs. With Gary Hart. I mean, you can't beat that. You can't beat that at all.
Skandar Akbar. Yes, he had a lot of heat. People didn't like Skandar Akbar. Someone else, I think that especially for the AWA fans, and that's Larry Zbyszko.
That's weird. I just looked at his name he was last on my list.
Larry
I went alphabetical order.
Nice, one of the nicest people you'll ever meet. But man, he could really make the people mad. He had that gift for talking the people into the building and making you hate him and making you want to see him get beat. I don't think there's a better person out there that could do an interview. Jack, do you have another name there?
Have we mentioned Bill Dundee yet?
No.
That's a good one.
I thought Bill was always great with everything he did. Of course, as a booker too, he was great. Quick story: when he came into Continental as the booker, I had been doing jobs there for a little while, and Ronnie came up to me and he said, "Hey, we got a new booker. It's up to him whether you get to stay or not. Go in there and talk to Bill." So I go knock the door and I walk in, and Bill's sitting there with his bag and between his legs, and he's got his notebook, and I, interrupt him there for a second, introduce myself. He said, "Sit down." I'm sit down right in front of him, and he reaches down in his bag for something, and his pistol comes sliding out, and it slides right between my feet, and he just sits there, and he's looking at me, and he looks down at the gun, and I look down at the gun. I look up at Bill, and I said, "Are you planning on?"
Oh no!
We didn't tell that story.
Man, we were into this.
Tell you right now, Bill Dundey's got connections. When he starts to tell about he's about to get shot or something in the dressing room, he got cut off like that. That's power right there. Wait, here comes back.
Now,
That was the greatest story ever told.
Oh, beautiful.
Anyway, it slides right between my feet, and I said, "Are you shooting on me, Bill?" And Bill said, "No, but if you want a job, you just got one just for your sense of humor."
Zbyszko had major heat in the WWF against Bruno. Yes, he did.
So did Stan Hansen.
Now I'm going to cover you all up for a minute. It's definitely keep you on the edge of your seat and coming back week after week. I can see my mom yelling and screaming at the TV and even throwing stuff at it. She was a huge wrestling fan, and I was able to take her to WWF Monday Night Raw event in Huntsville a couple years ago before she died. That was the best night of her life. We were ringside, and I couldn't keep her in her seat. That was what wrestling was all about. It was about the memories. It was about going to your wrestling matches, and even the early WWF was a great wrestling company. They did some great stuff, and it's
and a family affair.
It was a family affair.
For sure.
And I think that's missing in wrestling today, especially if you look at if you look in the crowd, it's all men now. It looks like so. Some wrestling needs to come along that takes the families into account and gives the people wrestling again, and that would be very nice to see. I think some have gotten closer to that now, but I think a good weekly territory would be good these days to get people's minds off of it. What happened to Jack over there? Did he?
Apparently he was sneezing into his hand, which he's protecting all people in his family, and that's good.
I think everybody would have to agree with this. The big cat, Ernie Ladd.
Yeah.
I mean, this guy.
One of our favorites. One of my favorites.
Just his interviews was spectacular.
And every TV announcer, it don't matter what commentator it was Mr. TV announcer. Let me tell you something, Mr. TV announcer. Don't be sending me out the bums out here in this ring. What's wrong with you? I am the big cat on the lad, 6'9", well over 300 pounds. Every single people coming out here, they're going to tell us what they're going to do. They're going to yip, and knock, and talking out of the side of their neck when they ain't going to do anything about the big cat on the lad. I love Dirty Lad.
He told Jim Ross one time, "What do you think I am, a bum seeker? Don't get these bums." He was Ernie Ladd was back then, and such a great guy, such a great guy, and had a lot of people told him you never ask Ernie Ladd what he thought because he would tell you. So you didn't want to do that. But Ernie Ladd. Anyone else before we get off of here that we're missing?
I'm going to put the spoiler with Gary Hart. Anywhere they went, Spoiler and Gary Hart, whether it been in Florida or in Texas or in Australia, I mean, they were getting. I watched a video from Australia, and it was people threw stuff on Gary Hart during the match. And this was at TV. This wasn't in a regular wrestling event. This was at TV where people were throwing stuff on Gary Hart. I remember when he was in Georgia, and the Spoiler was the Georgia heavyweight champion. It was, and the Spoiler was another one that was kind of scary. He had the claw. He could climb the ropes. And it was something. And like I said, the Spoiler, and in fact, all of Hart's Army, whether it be the Spoiler or Nikolai Volkov was another one. He had, like I said, it was something. And the Spoiler, to me, like I said, he was just scary with all those different type of masks, and especially when it was against Wrestling 2 in Atlanta. It was again, I was nervous yet again, because here's another one who's willing to hurt you.
Well, I got one that goes beyond the ring, but Downtown Bruno in both Continental and Memphis did a masterful job helping Sid Udy be absolutely hated as Lord Humongous. So much so that when they pulled Bruno off of Sid, and I think, are we back?
Yeah, I think we are. I think we're having storms out here. I think that's
yeah, we are.
But Bruno was fantastic in his role.
Yes, yeah, Bruno was good. I think he eventually went to WWF as Harvey Whippleman or something like that.
Yes. He I think he was the son of the guy that used to be in the toilet paper commercial that we went around squeezing the toilet paper. Mr. Whippleman.
I was for minutes ago. Brian said Nick Bockwinkel and Bobby Hernandez, and I really didn't know who Bobby Hernandez is. I wasn't going to really say. I think he meant Bobby Heenan and Nick Bockwinkel. Yes, Bobby Heenan. People hated his guts. They ain't no doubt. Bobby
Heenan. Nick Bockwinkel too. He'd run around. I always wondered why Bobby Heenan was with Nick Bockwinkel, because he didn't need anybody to talk. No. Bockwinkel could do his own interviews. He could talk about the White Sox to the end. In fact, there was a time in '77 where Bobby Heenan and Nick Bockwinkel came to Atlanta, and Dad was then talking about Nick Bockwinkel talking about the White Sox more so than Bobby Heenan. And I remember I don't know if anybody remembered, it was when Nick Bockwinkel was demonstrating the figure four. And in that, Bobby Heenan was in the ring. Gordon Solie was in the ring. And to break it up, Wrestling 2 came into the ring, and he started hitting everybody. Hit Bobby Heenan, hit Nick Bockwinkel, and then knocked out Gordon Solie while he was at it. And then Gordon couldn't do the rest of the show. But then the next week, he had to come out there too. So I just wanted to apologize. He said, I knew that you were there. I didn't mean to. It was just in the heat of the moment. And Gordon said, I understand, because Bockwinkel was not going to let go of the figure four unless 2. And then, of course, that led to the match Wrestling 2 against Nick Bockwinkel. And at the time, he was still the AWA World Heavyweight Champion in Atlanta. And we always wonder why he never defended the title. But he never defended his title the whole time he was there. He was there for about 6 weeks.
Jack, do you have anybody that we're missing?
Just honorable mention to the Nightmares.
Yes. Yeah.
They
people
were
hate
awesome as heels and huge as baby faces.
Yeah, they were very good at what they did. There's probably so many wrestlers that were missing that were great.
You mentioned the Garvins. You mentioned Jimmy Garvin, but Terry and Ronnie Garvin, no matter where they went, it was hot. Anywhere, whether they were in Florida, Tennessee, Georgia, Carolinas, the Garvins were the deal.
From Central States, Bob Brown.
Yeah, Bulldog Broadbound.
Yeah, we got to know him pretty good while we were there for about 6 weeks that we were there. But he was a great guy.
The people still hated him.
Lord Humongous, the Jason Voorhees of wrestling. He's scared. Well, we'll know what he said. He's scared about him. But now, which Lord Humongous are we talking about? Are we talking about Jeff Van Camp, which is a follower on our page, and we're going to talk to him somewhere in the future about or was his name Mike Sharp or something like that? And then you had Sid that was Lord Humongous, and I think there's another Lord Humongous. And right now I can't remember his name. Do you remember his name, Jack?
Bull Buchanan was Lord.
Yeah, he did the thing. There was somebody else, and I'm sorry that I'm not remembering your name, but
well, yeah.
But you know who I'm talking about, though. He does Lord Humongous.
And even Sid's son, Gunner, has even done the Lord Humongous thing a couple of times. That's not who you're talking about because it's been more recent. But Gunner Udy's even done it.
The Valiant Brothers. Yes.
Absolutely. I never did know that they came to Georgia.
Gary Nation. That's the guy. Yes. Sorry, Gary. I did remember you. I just didn't remember your name. But Gary Nation was the guy that did the other Lord Humongous. All right. So is there anyone else before we leave?
I'm going to say later on the Von Brauners with Saul Weinroth. I mean, you couldn't beat them. I remember, just barely remember them. I never got to get to see them, but I just barely remember. And Gentleman Saul, and I think that was Michael St. John's, one of his favorite people of all time. I mean, it was no matter where they went. I remember back, they had 26 consecutive weeks selling out Boutwell Auditorium against Lean Rossi and Bearcat Brown. I mean, that's just not just in Boutwell in Birmingham. That was all over, whether it was Chattanooga or Nashville or Memphis, they were super. We're forgetting about the Infernos, of course, one of our favorites, with J.C. Dykes, whether it be in the Florida or whether it be, and you have to watch out for the fireballs because everybody got them, whether it was Bobby Shane in Atlanta or one of the George or Sandy Scott in the Mid-Atlantic, or even Dory Funk Jr. over in Amarillo. The Infernos were hot, and I'm talking when they said the hottest box office attraction of all time. That's exactly what they meant. Because
they went everywhere.
Be sure there's a fireball coming somewhere.
I believe right now, I know next week we're going to do a program on WrestleMania's greatest moments and matches. And I believe right now, Jack, can people not get the WWE Network for free?
Yeah, it's a limited access, some of the older stuff and the content on there. But, of course, it's I think, pretty smart marketing tool right now to, get people to come in and see what you got and hopefully buy that membership. I mean, $10 a month. I've had it since day 2 because day 1 you couldn't get on. But, I enjoy the heck out of it.
Well, it gives people all week time to watch all the WrestleManias. And then we'll come back next Tuesday night and we'll see what people come up with. I've already watched. I got my free version of the WWE Network and I started watching it last night. So that's what we're going to do next week. The greatest matches or moments. They don't really have to be matches, but the greatest moments of WrestleMania. I think we're coming up on WrestleMania 36. Am I correct about that?
That's right. Yeah.
So we'll talk about that with that coming up. Guys, I want to thank you so much for being with us today. We will see everybody. Thank you, Rodney. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Mitch. And
don't forget Thursday.
That's right. Thursday, we will be talking to the Tennessee stud, Ron Fuller. And we'll also, right after that, me and Mitch will talk about Continental Championship Wrestling starting from January. And we'll do the whole month of January. We'll tell you where the wrestling was, what happened on the television programs, and we'll give a little behind the scenes on some of the stuff that happened on that particular day. Thank you so much, and we will see you later. Thank you for joining Pro Wrestling Inside and Out Live.